This. Good morning. I am Rachel. Nice to meet you all. And yeah, I was going to talk about. I was going to mention I've been in local government now for 21 years, and Scott was my first colleague. He was the first person I ever did any work with in local government, and we've stayed friends ever since. And what he says is absolutely spot on around co-production. When Scott and I started, 2005, when I started in local government, we called our residents taxpayers. That was it, dear taxpayer. That was what went out on the letter. We called them taxpayers and we called ourselves the authority in the third person. It was awful. And now, if you think about the attitudes that we have towards residents, neighbours, partners, community, friends, and all of the language that we've seen, that it just struck me. I thought, gosh, I remember one of the first things I did was say, we've got to stop calling people taxpayers. This is not who we are. But anyway, so I am Rachel. It's great to meet you all. I've got an hour. Now, we're not going to solve the lost art of policy making in the next hour. So I'm going to talk about four things, but I will introduce myself because a bit like Scott, I do always forget to introduce myself. So I have spent 20 years in local government. Don't look it, I know. But my subject matter expertise is revenues and benefits. I came up in the policy world through revenues, benefits, welfare reform, local welfare assistance, poverty, social policy side of things. So some of the examples that I use are revenues and benefits based, because when I left local government and went into policy and research more professionally, researching revenues is the research that I do. And I've got some research on its way out soon, so I've stolen a couple of my own slides, so you get to see one of the first outcomes that nobody has seen before. Now, prior to 2013, I describe as policy on local government's annus horribilis. Policy making in local government was radically different. We didn't have the financial pressures, we didn't have the same political pressures, the same sort of pressures that we spent, or the time that we spent looking outwards towards our communities, were all of a sudden faced inwards, looking at ourselves, structures, our organisation, how can we cut, how can we rejiggle things, and the policy focus, I believe, became quite inwardly focused rather than outwardly focused. I'm Lancastrian. I live and work in Hyndburn, over in Accrington. I work across the country, but this is my community, and I saw very much a focus on councils and not communities. I do think we're coming back around a little bit, but the damage has been done in many places. So the austerity localism agenda that changed that, particularly around local welfare, which I think is why some of my examples hopefully are quite apt. Now, when in 2013, one of the first big policy tasks I ever had was to redesign council tax reduction. No one had ever done it before across the country, but it was the biggest policy challenge that we'd faced in local revenues and benefits. And I looked at, became mega obsessed. I'm still obsessed. My research is still around council tax reduction. And I didn't understand why other people could look at the evidence that I was looking at and draw different conclusions. I will caveat this as I am neurodivergent as heck. And I didn't understand, I could not get my head around why some people were looking at the same thing and drawing different conclusions, wanting to cut welfare, thinking it was the right thing to do, wanting to place financial burdens on residents, wanting to, build these policies in the way that they did. So since then, I have been like a dog with a bone when it comes to the fragmentation of policy and how, I was saying to Pauline earlier, local government can quite aptly be described, I think, as 300 different organisations doing the same thing 300 different ways. And when we talk about evidence and, kicking off your evidence work, it's something that we need to take into account, that evidence is only as good as the interpretation, as the human that's looking at it and putting it in through the sausage factory and coming out the other end with policy solutions to things that you might be thinking, well, that's not what the evidence tells me. But that's why I became a little obsessed with it, and I got quite obsessed with personal bias, and started to look at, particularly in welfare, and our, not mine, I'm perfect, obviously, but other people's biases, because that's when bias comes in. It's always other people's biases, it's never our own. I'm full of them, obviously. But I became quite obsessed with it. But this morning, I want to talk about four pressures in policy making that I've noticed in particular, and so I now work as a consultant. I've worked with probably 60 or 70 councils at this point, and coming from a small district in East Lancashire to all of a sudden being exposed to London boroughs and massive unitaries and now combined authorities that I've been working with, it's really interesting as a policy landscape. Anyway, the four things I've noticed, the four pressures I've noticed that I'm going to go through today, and I do have more slides than this, I promise, but not many. I don't like slides. Financial pressure, going it alone pressure, and if anyone can think of a better term for that, I'd be grateful. But going it alone pressure, I think, is important because councils don't collaborate as much as they should do. There's political pressure. Obviously, we are political organisations, and then there's time pressure. And time is something that I could talk about endlessly. But what I want to talk about is the results on policy making of these four different pressures, and where it gets us, basically. So, yes. This is one of the findings from my research that hasn't been out yet. So, 55% of councils in England are unaware of the cost of council tax enforcement. So, I've done a large research project around the added costs of not paying your council. I'm not going to go into the revenue side of things. I could be here all month. So I've done a big project around understanding the added costs of going to a bailiff or an enforcement agent. And through an enormous freedom of information inquiry that's taken me and a research assistant nearly 9 months because of the number of appeals, because of the number of rejections that we get, to draw a conclusion. Financial conclusions, all the evidence has come out in lots of different really interesting ways around which areas charge more, do more. It's all natural deprivation. You researchers, you get what I'm talking about. But this is one of the unexpected but key findings that we have. 55% of councils have told us that they have no operational oversight over the amount of money that is being added onto their residents as a result of council tax enforcement. Now, that's interesting in itself, I think, especially when you consider that the cost of council tax enforcement to residents who don't pay is £1 billion a year. 775 million of that is enforcement costs from bailiffs. And 55% of councils are unaware of the tens of millions of pounds their council is adding on to council tax debt. So that's shocking enough as this, but what does this tell us about policy making? Well, this is just one of the results of financial pressure. So council tax, and again, I'm not going to talk about council tax endlessly because I'm aware that I can. It's becoming the biggest pot of money that most local councils have. And so council tax collection pressures are resulting in what I see up and down the country all the time is really poor policy making. I think this is really poor policy making because this is not having evidence that you could get, but you don't have. It's kind of it's a bit cheeky because it's a revenues term, but we call it willful ignorance or culpable neglect. And that's what happens when you go to prison for council tax. You've got to prove one of these two things. I think this is willful ignorance. I also think it's a little bit of culpable neglect, but I know it is the result of operational pressure, financial pressure, and the perverse incentives that we have in policy making as a result of these overwhelming financial pressures. So revenues managers, great people. I am one of them. I came up through this track. But this will be a surprise to a lot of them because their only focus is collect the money. The pressure is enormous and the perverse incentives are, incredibly incentivizing because we need to hit collection targets. We must do this. We must collect. We must find these ways. And yet, that's probably one of the, if you think of it like a bicycle wheel, I think, the central spoke and all of the different sort of, what do you call them? Spokes. Yeah. The impact on health, on education, on food on the table, on heating versus eating. Council tax is one of the biggest bills that people have. And yet, because of the financial pressures that we have, we are building policy around evidence that we know we don't have. We're building, procedures and really impacting people's lives with, I think, quite poor policy. But again, there's no blame here, although I'm being quite harsh about it. There's no blame that this is financial pressure. This is the result of financial pressure. There are multiple other examples of where we see financial pressure coming out in policy making. So whenever we lead with money, but that's the only thing we can do. Whenever we say no to things because that's the only thing we can do, financial pressure is having much more of an impact, I think, on the outcomes of policy and the decisions that are going into it. Everything needs to be cost neutral, or you need to be able to save. You need to, Blackpool, we're talking a £250 million, is it? It's been lost. A third of your staff, the cumulative £2 billion that has gone out of our country's most deprived borough. Financial pressure will be the undercurrent of every single thing that you do, but it's rarely talked about in policy terms. Yeah, we talk about the cost of things, but we don't talk about the pressure of the cost of those things impacting the decisions that we eventually make. We all would love to have the moon on a stick and to do everything for our residents. I'm not talking about the sort of lost opportunity, although I kind of am, but I'm talking about things like this, where we end up completely blind to the impact of one of our council's main functions, because it's the engine room, it's where the money comes into. This, I think, is pretty bad policy, and I think it's when we talk about the lost art of policy making, the added impact from something like this is enormous. The next pressure, oh, and by the way, ask questions at any point if you want to, that's absolutely fine. Yes.
So you just mentioned about your current research.
Yeah.
Does that also include Blackpool Council?
Yeah, it's all of them. Yeah.
And then I guess it was just one point because I know that Acorn did some research recently that mentioned about our council tax.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we were top 5, we were number 2.
Yeah, well, you do well. Yeah.
I think something like that anyway. It was a while since we did it. But I was just wondering, do you have a single piece of advice that could actually give the council the better impact residents of our specific council?
Yeah, it's probably a much larger conversation, but ban the bailiff, scrap council tax entirely, reinvent local government funding. That's the biggest piece of advice I could give. But we can, yes, thank you. I'm on a mission to scrap council tax, but that is an entirely different story. Okay, the second pressure, and it's another revenues and benefits example, so forgive me, it's going it alone pressure. And this is where an awful lot of the fragmentation that we see in policymaking comes about. Now, when we talked about sort of post 2013 councils, the policy making turned inwards and we looked at ourselves as organisations, and it was about restructuring and a lot less about the community. It was a lot less externally focused. One of the things that we ended up doing was localising policy at the same time. So in the welfare world, this is what the government at the time wanted to do. Now, and I said in the introduction, in 2013, I was responsible for implementing council tax reduction for Hindburn. I've since done it and I do it for other councils now. And what we get in this going it alone pressure is fragmentation. So this is a map of the maximum levels of council tax reduction. This is 24/5 because it's data I've got my hands on. And this is a map of the maximum amount of council tax reduction that you can get. So the darker the colour, the higher the level of support. This map tells you about the levels of fragmentation that we see. So when we're looking at our policy for Blackpool, or we're looking at our policy for Manchester, we are still quite sort of insular focused, if you know what I mean. But that's fine, because again, no blame. I cast no shade on these things because that's the task that you've been given. But the impact on a wider scale is fragmentation and geographic injustice. So when we're looking at evidence and when we're looking at policy making and when we localise policy and give it to a local authority, and this is one in dozens and dozens of examples, I could pull up any local policy, welfare, anything, any grant delivery, a household support fund, community crisis and resilience funding, council tax reduction, council tax charges. I could pull up how much money was spent on free school meals during holidays, everything. You will see not a map similar to this in terms of where the colours are, because this doesn't map, to anything. It doesn't map. So in the research that we do, that's my colleague. In the research that we do, we haven't found, and other scholars as well haven't found any real sort of convincing correlation between deprivation and council tax reduction levels, between the types of council and council tax reduction. I mean, there is some, but it doesn't map cleanly enough that we would be confident presenting it as evidence of, sort of pressures here equals pressures in policy there. So what is it? What is this fragmentation and how are we getting there? This is where personal bias comes in. This is where political bias comes in. But it's one of the biggest pressures, I think, on local government. We are doing the same thing 300 different ways. I talk about England and Wales. Scotland do their own thing. Northern Ireland, I don't even know what they do. But in England, this is what we've ended up with. Now, Scotland and Wales both have standard schemes. And so the pressure isn't quite the same. But look at this. If this was universal credit levels or the money that we pay out, welfare is fragmented, but the geographic injustice that this is creating, and this is also an administrative injustice, I believe, as well. So the amount of time and pressure that goes into producing each one of the, and it's enormous. These are millions and millions of pounds worth of benefits where the revenues managers that calculate this stuff, they are shells of people by the time you get to April the 1st, because this is tough stuff. You cannot get it wrong. If your bills go out incorrectly, your whole council tax is not collectible. This is high stakes policy making, believe it or not. And look what we end up with. We end up with two families in exactly the same situation can live in one borough or the next one and have two completely different levels of support, two completely different relationships with local councils, one where they get full support, happy days. In other areas, in places like Dudley, you're paying 63% of a council tax bill. Hundreds of pounds, hundreds and hundreds of pounds a year if you're on the basic of universal credit. But this is what we get. And then next door, you can have 100% and pay nothing. The going it alone pressure means that when we are focused, and we have no time to do this. In 2013, we had from 2012 to 2013 to do this. That was it. So we just got our heads down like everything else. Scott knows this painfully well. Like everything else, you get your head down and you just do it. Well, everyone here is just doing it and just doing it the best way that they think they're doing it. But the geographic injustice is enormous. I was going to do a bit more on this and sort of look at just Lancashire, because we're a basket case when it comes to things like this. When it comes to plenty of things that I've studied, different schemes, different grant delivery schemes with the same guidance, kind of the same populations. I get that, across the county we do vary, but on my patch in East Lancs, we've got Hyndburn, Burnley, Blackburn, Rosendale, Pendle, like they're just indistinguishable from each other sort of socioeconomically in major ways. 5 different ways of doing it. 5 different best outcomes. This pressure, this going it along, but they don't get together as a region or even as part of a council and go, what are you doing? We're doing this. Do you want to share what you're doing? Do you want to do it together? They don't, because we don't have enough time, which we'll come on to. But this is what we get. This is the outcome of that going it alone pressure.
Rachel, just move off on that, can I ask? So you mentioned that, was it 2012, 13 when this?
2013 was the first year, yeah.
So it's a question about your research. Have you looked at how the variation has changed over time? Because
Yes.
I think my hypothesis, which might be about to disprove, would be that there was some thought given to this initially, and then no subsequent thoughts, and everything then became about how you fit this in with the budget rather than a reflective process about how this fits with your community.
It's exactly what you think it is. It is how much money can we save? How much money do we have? Fit it in with the budget. It's budget first in a lot of places. In other places, it's politics first. Doesn't matter what the cost. I will not drop it because I am the leader and this is what we get. But yeah, there has been, since 2013, we've had 13 years of council tax reduction data now. So we're getting some really super interesting insights and research. It's been going on long enough to be able to talk about it with confidence. But yes, we are seeing different trends. Trends towards the style of scheme, trends towards more generosity. So some councils started off being less generous, realised stupid idea, and then started becoming more generous. So it's a real mind. It's great for research, is council tax reduction, because it's one of the biggest bills that households have, and it's one of the most direct relationships that we have with our residents, or taxpayers as we used to call them. So the next one I want to talk about is, keeping an eye on time because I'm dreadful and I want to leave time for questions, is political pressure. So there is a little political pressure here, but again, let's have a think about. So we talk about evidence, and you're kicking off a great exploration of what evidence means here. And there's a guy I was telling Pauline about earlier, Paul Kearney. If you're not reading his work on local government policy making, do. It's brilliant, Cairney. He's got a great blog, does loads of books. I find him really interesting. He has a bee in his bonnet about evidence-based policy. I have kind of, his bee is now in my box. No, that's happily married. But Paul Kearney will say there's a difference. There's evidence-based policy, and then there's policy-based evidence. And when it comes to political pressure, what we kind of see, I think, again, these are all my views on my own, policy-based evidence is very different to evidence-based policy. Now, in very much the same way that 296 different revenues teams and benefits teams and policy teams can produce 296 different council tax reduction models, our political pressure gives us something like this. Sorry, Scott. Because Scott wrote one of these. No, I'm hoping we all recognise this. These are the 5 proposals for what Lancashire could look like soon. Now, not going to go into LGR, not going to talk massively about LGR as a process, but I want to talk about it in terms of policy making. And I want to talk about it in terms of policy-based evidence rather than evidence-based policy. Some of these will be policy-based evidence, some of these will be evidence-based policy. Some of these will be absolutely spot on. It could be a secret 6th, 7th or 8th model that is the perfect one that we need. But this is another example of the people that would put these together looking at the same evidence, the same people, the same communities, the same guidance, the same options, and coming up with 5 different best ideas. Again, no offence. Because
which the best one is, obviously.
I mean, yeah, I mean, tots. I completely know. Do you know what? But then I look at these and I think I wouldn't have done any of this. I would have done something else based on my knowledge of Lancashire. So again, this is about interpretation of evidence. Now, I've put this under political pressure because an awful lot of this is political. I do, and have read all of these proposals, see that some of them are a lot more evidence-based than others. You know, I live sandwiched between Blackburn and Burnley, and they just don't want to play football together. So the political pressures that we have, you know, one of these will create pretty much guaranteed the most deprived borough in the country based on political evidence-based policy-based evidence, whichever way you want to have a look at it. But this is the result of policy interpretation. It's the same thing as looking at evidence and having and sort of drawing completely different conclusions. I think it's a really good one, and this isn't a Lancashire problem, that you get the same multiple options from pretty much every county area that is going through LGR at the moment. I think it's Essex where the government have gone, surprise, we're going to give you one that you didn't even ask for. Because they don't agree, you know. So this is a contentious, massive, and this has been done, yes, with consultation, but not been done with a democratic sort of layer in it. There's no referenda going on. People don't get to choose. Politicians in Westminster are going to choose our new footprints. So when we think about the evidence and all of the evidence that goes into policy, so everything that Scott and his team or that everybody else in their teams will have been looking at, you know, sort of deprivation indexes, political boundaries, you know, funding mechanisms, the spread or heat map of social care need across the county. All of these different bits of evidence have gone in, and ultimately we're going to get a political decision about what some ministers down in Westminster probably couldn't tell you Hindburns from your Ribble Valleys. Oh no, they probably could with that one, but your Hindburns from your Blackburns, you know, they won't know the difference. And our communities are being rearranged based on political interpretation of evidence. And I hope dearly that this isn't coming across as a no point doing any evidence because they'll just do what they want to. Obviously, that's not the case. But I do think this is a really good example of the political dimension. So we've talked about the financial pressure and the outputs that we get for residents and the unknown costs and the kind of very autocratic way in which we collect council tax. You know, it's very financial, must collect the money, must collect the money. We've talked about going it alone pressure and the fragmentation and just get your head down and do it. LGR is no different. You've got about 8 minutes to sort this out. And once we get the decision, you've got about 12 minutes to make it happen. You know, these are incredibly short turnarounds. And we talked about political pressure here. The last one I want to talk about, keeping an eye on time, so I really want to have time for questions, is time pressure. I've become a bit obsessed with time. But so the time pressure that we have in local government. Now, local government's ancient, you know, 1974 was the last time that we rearranged anything with any gusto, and we're doing it again now. You know, we've been around, and I can, because again, local taxation is my obsession, I can trace local taxation back to 1066. True story. In 1601, there was a whole big shake-up, and then we get to the 90s, and there's another big shake-up. But anyway, we have these sort of periods of massive disruption, but actually local government and social care and sort of caring for the community through whatever forms, whether it's parish councils or feudal landlords, has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Yet in local government, we are extremely, at the moment, defined by short-termism. And this time pressure is having extraordinary impacts on policy. So when we talk about time, there is one thing that I absolutely love to talk about. It's a great example, I think. Bit of a departure from the rest of them. This is York Minster Cathedral. I presented this in York not so long ago, and most people didn't know what this was. I was like, it's there, it's massive, it's right there, it's huge, can't miss it, it's this. York Minster Cathedral. Does anybody know or have a guess at how long York Minster Cathedral took to build? No, okay, you've gone high there, it's 252. Most people go like, 30. No. 252 years to build York Minster Cathedral. 9 generations of people built this. I mean, and even on the foundations, there's Viking, all sorts going on. But this particular iteration of whatever is on this site took 252 years and 9 generations of stonemasons and joiners and carpenters to build. The people who laid the foundation for this knew they would never see the building be finished. Time, when you are building a cathedral, means something entirely different. Not within their lifetimes, for generations sort of 1 to 6, would they even see the building be finished. And yet, over and across all of these hundreds of people, hundreds of years, they had a single mission, a single focus, build this. I mean, inspired by religious awe and all this, and this is not without its problems, you know, this is the church after all, but this is an incredible achievement, probably like one of the greatest projects you'll ever see, human achievements of passing it down generation after generation, single focus, single mission, multi-generational families working on the same thing towards one goal. If I was going to ask someone to build a cathedral today, the last people I would ask is the local council, because it would need to be done within this financial year. It would need to be done, you know, perhaps with a nod towards co-production, and then you just completely screwed because nobody would want this, and there's all kinds of different people wanting very different things. We cannot fund anything beyond, say, 3 years. At the moment, in the welfare world, we are celebrating the Crisis and Resilience Fund for 3 years of funding certainty. 3 years, goodness me. Poverty took decades to get where we are now, and the government wants to turn it around in 3 years or within a parliamentary cycle or within the next 12 months. You've got to do X, Y, and Z as a local authority, and I want to see evidence, I want to see management information, I want to see how you spent that, I want to see having it evaluated in order to make a difference. I want to see the impact on your children's policy, I want to see the impact on your regeneration policy, I want to see all, and I want to see all on March the 31st, please. That is the time pressure that local government is under at the moment. And we could never build a cathedral, because all we're doing is pitching tents. There are tents that are needed, fair enough. We need the day-to-day, we need emergency social care, we need homelessness, housing advice, we need welfare support services, we need pothole fillers, we need the day-to-day stuff, we need the tents. But when it comes to true change and proper, and like I said, I talk about the poverty world, so this is where this analogy has come from. We're not seeing time in a way in which policy making or policymakers want. The beverage report, we're talking about, big generational changes in the way that national policy has evolved have never been short term, and yet local government is absolutely trapped in the now at the moment. This time pressure is everything. So I've talked about these 4 pressures. What I want to do is talk about I don't have any more slides. So you're stuck with York Minster Cathedral now. And I can't go backwards. No, I can't go backwards. No, in fact, I'll put that down just in case. Yeah, I've told them no, cannot go backwards. So financial pressure. What is the answer to making policy under financial pressure? More money, obs, Rachel. But it's not though, is it? Because that's not coming. More money isn't coming. We've had a fair funding review and Blackpool still had £17 million gap in your budget. We get a little bit of money here and there. You get nods, you get a bit of social care money, or you'll get a bit of pride in place money, or, we have pockets of money, but we don't have money. So we're not going to get more money. So what's the answer? I think awareness and impact, that we're actually, so self-recognition that we are being dictated to in a policy environment by the lack of money and the financial pressures. Not in every part of the council, but some of the parts that are doing potentially the most damage are under the greatest financial pressures. In terms of going it alone pressure, again, do need a better title for that, solo pressure. I don't know what it is. But the fragmentation and geographic injustice that we're seeing as a result of our going it alone pressures mean that, we don't have time. They're all blended in together. We don't have time to collaborate. Now, LGR is presenting us with a once-in-a-generation opportunity to collaborate a little more. However, it's being done from a top-down, you will do this. From a policy-making perspective, my biggest fear is that we'll all get stuck in a room and it'll be like the Hunger Games, and whoever's policy wins is the one that you come out with, and it won't necessarily be based on collaboration or first principles or, old-fashioned policy making. Let's look at some sort of theory of change or policy cycle or, that kind of thing. When Scott and I first started in local government, we were part of a pan-Lancashire, Blackpool weren't involved, shared services contact centre project. Am I giving you PTSD at this point?
I can see Steve Riley from that with his 4 sheets of different coloured paper.
Oh, crikey. I tried to convince Bin Men at one point, this is going back, that you can pick something up if it's on a different coloured piece of paper. Anyway, that we are going back a while. But this big multi-million-pound project basically collapsed because nobody would agree on how to pick up the bins. And it wasn't even bins, it was bulky items, it was mattresses. No council would agree on the order or the method of collecting bulky household waste. We want those same councils now to form new super councils within 18 months. We want you to collaborate. We want you to be from day one safe, legal, and ready to serve your new community. With what? This is time pressure, political pressure, financial pressure, kind of going it alone pressure, because we've been competing for 50 years and now you're supposed to be friends and you're all competing for the same jobs and, no pressure. You're just going to have to invent a new council. It's a really big deal, but LGR is giving us what in sort of policy and research what we call a punctuated equilibrium. It's a massive shake-up amongst quite a long period of stability. But when it comes to policy making, that's not necessarily the best conditions in which to invent new councils and new policy. But we'll see what happens. In terms of political pressure, I think from people like us, because, trying to convince, I spent a long time trying to convince politicians to do certain things. It's very difficult, and we all know that. But I think us knowing the difference between evidence-based policy and policy-based evidence, being ethical about our evidence, and by, sort of demonstrating, it's as much what we don't recommend as what we do recommend. there is an enormous body of literature out there around how we present ideas and options to policymakers. We are not the policymakers. We are the I don't know what the term would be, but we are informal policymakers. According to Kenny's work, read it, you won't regret it. It's extremely accessible. He does things like concepts in 500 words, and it's all around sort of local government policymaking. And then finally, the time pressure. So fair enough, we're not going to be building any cathedrals, but we can recognise that time pressure is a mindset, I think. Yes, we've still got to do things by March 31st, and when MHCLG comes along with £3 billion worth of, because you never know, they could announce something today. That is where we're at. Something could be announced today that we've never heard of, that local government's going to have to deliver, and you're going to have to do it immediately. There's a bit of guidance. It's going to arrive 3 weeks after your go start date, but you know, whatever, it's your problem, not theirs. These are all time pressures, but the cathedral analogy might be, it's more of a political macro type of thing, but this is a great opportunity with LGR to start thinking about building cathedrals, to start thinking about what is our community going to look like in 25, not perhaps not 250 years time, but 25 years time. What if we get to another reorganisation in 50 years? What are we going to build? What are we going to do? What is this community going to be? I do think it's a mindset change. I don't think any of us are looking up enough and across time enough to start thinking about this in terms of policy. Think about when you're doing your next policy recommendation, you're just laying the foundations, but describe it as that. This is just step one in 25 years that we can see the direction that we're travelling in. Those are the 4 pressures, I think, that have brought about lost art of policy making. I think it's unique to local government. The central government departments that I've worked with don't quite face the same pressures. Bigger councils and regional authorities don't quite face the same pressures as boroughs as we do, as fragmented, smaller, lower tier. But you're not lower, you're the same. But coming from the district world, it's kind of mindset I'm trapped in. But hopefully you can see where I'm coming from with this. So you will get the slides, but good luck, because they won't mean anything to anybody who hasn't listened to this. But I'm open to questions. We've got 20 minutes, and I would love to answer anything. Thank you.